Usually, when we think about our health, we just think about the purely physical reality of our bodies.
Yeah, the tangible stuff.
Exactly. You look in the mirror, you see yourself,
Yeah.
you get a cut in your arm, you watch it bleed, you put a bandage on it. It's incredibly tangible. It's just the flesh and bone reality we all live in every single day.
Right, it's immediate. It's right there in front of you, literally occupying physical space.
But the moment you step foot into the modern healthcare system, another version of you is instantly created.
A shadow version.
Yeah, a shadow version. And it doesn't have flesh, it doesn't have bone, and it definitely doesn't bleed. It is constructed entirely out of ones and zeros.
It's just pure data.
Pure data. It's this massive, sprawling digital tapestry made up of your DNA sequences, your family history notes, your imaging scans, and thousands of obscure billing codes.
Mm-hmm.
And this invisible, high-stakes ecosystem of your most personal data is, honestly, in the modern era, arguably just as important to your survival as your physical body.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is the absolute definition of a hidden universe. That digital shadow is infinitely replicable, it is highly vulnerable, and it is incredibly valuable.
Highly valuable.
Right. And right now, there is this quiet, intense war being fought over who gets to own it, who gets to look at it, and who gets to profit from it.
And that is exactly our mission for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We are taking you, yes, you listening right now, on a journey through the complete life cycle of your medical data.
It's quite a journey.
It really is. We are going to connect the dots across a pretty fascinating stack of sources we've pulled together.
Yeah, we have a lot of ground to cover.
We do. We're looking at a heartbreaking historical case study about the very first immortal human cells. We have federal guidelines detailing the massive All of Us Precision Medicine program.
We're also diving into some cutting-edge studies from the Journal of Genetic Counseling.
Right. And we are unpacking some incredibly dense legal frameworks covering health informatics, privacy laws, and interoperability.
And, if we synthesize all of this material, a very clear, overarching theme emerges.
What's that?
Well, as medical data has become so easy to replicate and so vital to scientific discovery, the entire healthcare system has found itself caught in this massive, agonizing tug of war.
A tug of war between what?
On one end of the rope, you have the absolute mandate to keep this incredibly sensitive data locked away in massive digital fortresses to protect you from cybercriminals.
Right, keep it totally locked down.
Exactly. But on the other end of the rope, you have this desperate, life-saving need to tear those walls down, to open the data up for precision medicine innovation, and to ensure that you, the patient, can actually access your own biology.
It's a total paradox. Protect the data by locking it up, but save lives by sharing it.
Exactly.
And to understand how we got caught in this paradox, to understand why the medical privacy laws and informed consent forms you sign at the doctor's office are so complex today, we kind of have to look backward.
We do. We have to start with the tragic historical catalyst that changed human science forever.
Right. We cannot understand the digital shadow without understanding the physical origin point.
So we have to go back to 1951, to Baltimore, Maryland.
Yeah. This is the story of Henrietta Lacks. In 1951, Henrietta was a poor black tobacco farmer. She had grown up in Southern Virginia, eventually moving up to Baltimore with her husband. She was a mother of 5.
And she was so young.
She was just 30 years old when she started experiencing severe pain and bleeding. She was diagnosed with an incredibly aggressive form of cervical cancer.
And we really have to frame this within the reality of the era. I mean, the dictates of segregation completely controlled her medical care.
Right, the Jim Crow era.
Exactly. She went to Johns Hopkins because it was essentially the only major hospital in the area that would even treat black patients.
Wow.
And when she arrived, she was placed in the public ward. That was the specific segregated area for those who were black or impoverished and just had nowhere else to go for care.
And here is the crucial history-altering detail from our sources. During her treatment, her doctor performed a biopsy.
A routine procedure.
Right. He cut a small piece of her tumor, a tissue sample about the size of a nickel.
Yeah.
And instead of just testing it and disposing of it, he sent that tissue sample down the hall to a man named George Gay.
George Gay was the head of tissue culture research at Hopkins.
And the doctor did this without asking Henrietta.
No consent at all.
He did it without telling her. She had absolutely no idea a piece of her body was being given to a researcher.
Which, to be fair, was standard practice at the time. The concept of informed consent for discarded tissue just didn't exist.
It wasn't a thing.
Not at all. But to understand why George Gay wanted that tissue so badly, we have to understand the scientific context of the mid-20th century.
Okay, set the scene.
For decades, scientists all over the globe had been desperately trying to grow human cells outside of the human body in a laboratory setting.
Like in a petri dish.
Exactly. It was viewed as the holy grail of medical research. I mean, if you could grow human cells in a petri dish, you could test drugs on them. You could study how viruses replicate.
You could understand cancer without experimenting on a living person.
Precisely. But the cells always died.
They just wouldn't survive.
Right. Researchers would feed them, incubate them, do absolutely everything right. But the cells would survive a few days, maybe a couple of weeks, and then they would inevitably perish.
It was a massive bottleneck for human knowledge.
Until Henrietta's cells arrived in that lab. Her cells were a biological anomaly.
They didn't die.
They didn't just survive, they thrived in a way no one had ever witnessed. While other cells curled up and died, Henrietta's cells doubled their numbers every 24 hours.
That's insane.
They went from 2 dishes to 4 to 8 to 16. They completely overtook the laboratory equipment.
So George Gay realized quite suddenly that he had achieved the impossible.
He had the world's first immortal human cell line.
He called them HeLa cells, taking the first 2 letters of her first name, H-E, and the first 2 letters of her last name, L-A, HeLa. But he didn't lock them in a vault. He didn't keep them a secret.
No, quite the opposite. Gay was, well, he was an idealist in that regard. He wanted to cure cancer. So he started sharing Henrietta's cells with scientists globally.
Just giving them away.
Basically, yeah. He would package them up and send them on planes, trains, and in the mail, and the demand was instantaneous and insatiable.
I bet. Everyone wanted them.
Everyone in the scientific community wanted HeLa cells. The scale of what happened next is almost difficult to comprehend. Actual, literal factories were built for the sole purpose of mass-producing Henrietta Lacks cells.
The sources outline the metrics of this industrialization, and it is staggering. We are talking about an assembly line generating an estimated 6 trillion cells every single week.
6 trillion.
6 trillion.
To put that kind of biological mass into perspective, one of our sources notes that if you could have somehow saved every single HeLa cell ever grown since 1951, and you put them on a massive scale today, they would weigh more than 15 million metric tons.
Wait, I really want to pause on that number, because a single microscopic cell weighs practically nothing.
Nothing at all.
15 million metric tons. To ground that is roughly the equivalent weight of 40 Empire State Buildings.
It's hard to even picture.
40 skyscrapers, grown entirely from the microscopic cells of one 30-year-old woman.
And because they were manufactured at that unprecedented scale, they became the fundamental workhorse of modern biology.
Right.
The sheer volume of medical breakthroughs achieved using her cells is astonishing. When Jonas Salk was developing the polio vaccine, he needed a way to test it on a massive scale. He used HeLa cells.
Oh, wow.
When scientists wanted to know what zero gravity would do to human flesh before sending astronauts into orbit, they sent HeLa cells up in the first space missions.
They were the very first human cells to ever be cloned.
Yeah.
They helped scientists map the first human genes. If you or someone you know has taken vital cancer drugs like vincristine or tamoxifen, the foundational research relied on HeLa cells.
Absolutely. The HPV vaccine, which prevents cervical cancer today, was developed using them.
Even IVF, right?
Yes, even the foundational technology for in vitro fertilization, which has allowed millions of families to have children, owes its existence to Henrietta's biology.
It is a scientific legacy that is unmatched.
Yeah.
But, and this is where the narrative takes a profoundly dive turn, we have to look at the human cost.
The tragedy of it all.
Yeah. While Henrietta's cells were achieving immortality in labs across the globe, Henrietta herself was dying.
The cancer was insanely aggressive.
It spread rapidly to almost every organ in her body. She passed away in excruciating pain just after her 31st birthday.
She left behind 5 young children, and her family, her husband David, and those kids had absolutely no idea about any of this.
All of it.
They had no idea that a multi-billion-dollar biotech industry was being built on their mother's biology.
While pharmaceutical companies were patenting discoveries made with HeLa cells, the Lacks family was living in severe poverty in East Baltimore.
Right.
They literally could not afford the health insurance to access the very medical treatments their mother's cells helped create.
It's a painful irony. And they remained in the dark for over 20 years. They didn't find out until the 1970s.
And how did they find out?
Well, the way they found out perfectly illustrates the catastrophic communication breakdown that birthed modern medical ethics.
Okay, walk us through it.
In the early days of gene mapping, a prominent geneticist at Hopkins named Victor McCusick, he's often referred to as the grandfather of the Human Genome Project.
A big deal.
A very big deal. He wanted to learn more about HeLa cells. Specifically, he wanted to map their genetics. To do that, he realized he needed to track down Henrietta's surviving children to get samples of their DNA so he could compare it to the HeLa line.
So he sends a postdoc researcher to contact David Lacks, Henrietta's husband.
Right.
Now, the source material details this interaction, and it is devastating to read. It is a tragic game of telephone where two people are speaking completely different languages, but neither of them realizes it until the damage is done.
The linguistic and cultural barriers were insurmountable. The postdoc researcher was from China. She was relatively new to the United States, speaking English with a heavy accent, and she was communicating in incredibly dense academic scientific jargon.
Oh, no.
Yeah, she was talking about HeLa markers, immortal cell lines, and genomic sequencing.
Right. And on the other end of the phone is David Lacks. He had a fourth-grade education. He spoke with a very thick Southern Virginia accent that his own children affectionately described as a country mumble.
Right.
So the postdoc thinks she is excitedly explaining this miraculous scientific legacy to a proud husband. But what is David actually hearing?
Well, David hears the word cell. Now, within his life experience and vocabulary, a cell doesn't mean a microscopic biological unit.
No.
The only cell he knows is a prison cell.
He literally thought the hospital was calling to tell him they had a piece of his wife alive, locked in a prison cell at Johns Hopkins,
Yes.
and that they had been experimenting on her living flesh for 25 years.
It's horrifying. And to make it worse, because they were asking to come draw blood from his children, he thought they were telling him his children were sick.
Oh, my God.
He thought they needed to be tested for the aggressive cancer that killed their mother.
The psychological trauma this inflicted on the family was profound, particularly for her daughter, Deborah.
Deborah went through so much.
She was just a toddler when her mother died. Now, she was approaching her 30th birthday, which was the exact age her mother was when she got sick.
Right.
She was already terrified she was going to die young. Suddenly, researchers from Hopkins are showing up, drawing her blood, and speaking in confusing scientific terms.
She took this as confirmation that she was going to die.
Deborah was so desperate for any connection to the mother she never knew. The sources detail how, when the researchers came to draw her blood, she would ask them these heartbreaking questions.
Yeah.
She would ask if they could look at the cells under the microscope and tell her what her mother's favorite color was. She asked if the cells could tell her if her mother liked to dance.
And because she heard through the media that scientists were shooting her mother's cells to the moon or intentionally infecting them with polio or radiation, her framework for understanding this was deeply spiritual.
Spiritual, how?
She genuinely believed that her mother's spirit, her soul, was suffering physical agony in the afterlife because of these experiments. She felt an overwhelming burden to protect her mother's soul from the scientific community.
And how did that scientific establishment respond to a grieving daughter asking these questions?
Terribly.
Yeah, one researcher literally just handed Deborah a highly technical, dense medical school genetics textbook and essentially told her to read it if she wanted answers.
They were entirely, woefully unequipped to handle the human psychosocial fallout of their own research.
Which brings us to the core, so what, of this historical foundation. Why is this the starting point for a discussion about modern medical data?
It's the catalyst.
Right, because this massive communication misfire, combined with the horrifying realization that researchers and corporations were profiting endlessly off a woman's biology without her family's knowledge, birthed the modern imperative for informed consent.
It laid the absolute ethical foundation for everything we do today.
It's the reason why, when you go to the hospital to get a biopsy or a blood test, you have to sign a stack of papers explaining exactly what will be done with your tissue,
Exactly.
how your DNA will be analyzed, and who owns the resulting data. We realized we couldn't just take biology in the dark anymore. We had to ask for it.
We had to ask. And that ethical shift transitions us perfectly from the non-consensual taking of Henrietta's cells in the 1950s to how the federal government is attempting to ethically crowdsource biological data today.
Right, moving from a single cell line to massive population-level data sets.
Which brings us to the All of Us research program.
I really want to spend some time here because the scale of what the government is trying to do is wild. The National Institutes of Health established this program to be the foundational tool of the 21st century. And its stated goal is to advance precision medicine. Now, okay, let's unpack this. That is a buzzword that gets thrown around constantly in health tech. But what does precision medicine actually look like in practice compared to how we used to do things?
Think about the historical approach to medicine as a one-size-fits-all model.
Okay.
If a pharmaceutical company was developing a blood pressure medication, they would run clinical trials, find the dosage that worked for the statistical average person, and then prescribe that exact same pill to millions of people.
But nobody's actually the exact mathematical average.
Precisely. You might metabolize that drug twice as fast as the average person, meaning it does nothing for you.
Right.
Or you might metabolize it half as fast, meaning a standard dose becomes toxic to your liver.
Okay.
Precision medicine flips the entire model upside down. It abandons the average. It attempts to treat you as a highly specific individual.
So it looks at everything.
Everything. It factors in your unique environment. Are you exposed to smog or clean air? It factors in your lifestyle. Do you work night shifts or run marathons? It looks at your family health history. And most importantly, it looks at your specific genetic makeup.
So instead of giving me a pill and saying, let's see if this works in a month, the goal is to look at my DNA and say, we know with mathematical certainty that this specific molecular compound will work for your exact biology on the first try.
That is the dream. It eliminates the agonizing, expensive trial and error process of prescribing medication.
But I imagine there's a catch.
There is a massive hurdle. To build the algorithms that can predict what treatment works for what genetics, researchers need data.
A lot of it.
They need mountains of data. They need to analyze the DNA, lifestyles, and health outcomes of hundreds of thousands of people to spot the patterns.
And that is what the All of Us program is doing. They are actively trying to recruit and build a database of over 1 million volunteers across the United States. And they aren't just studying one specific thing, like breast cancer or heart disease. They're building a massive agnostic repository of data that can inform thousands of different medical studies simultaneously.
And a crucial piece of their mandate is diversity.
Right, learning from the past.
Exactly. Historically, massive clinical trials and genetic databases have skewed heavily toward populations of European descent. That means the resulting drugs and algorithms are optimized for that specific demographic, leaving out massive portions of the population.
Right.
All of us is intentionally trying to over-index on historically underrepresented demographics so that the precision medicine of the future actually works for everyone.
It tells like the perfect evolution from the Lacks tragedy. Ethical, consensual, diverse, large-scale data collection.
On paper, it is.
But our sources highlight a massive existential threat to this program. Doing this ethically and keeping all that genetic data highly secure is incredibly expensive.
Very expensive.
And because it's a federal program, it is highly vulnerable to the whims of the annual congressional budgeting process.
The financial realities outlined in the source documents are stark. The program was heavily authorized by the 21st Century Cures Act back in 2016. But fast forward to today, and the funding is facing catastrophic cliffs.
How bad is it?
In fiscal year 2024, the program saw its Cures Act funding drop by $184 million.
Which, just doing the math, is a 34% decrease in their budget practically overnight.
And it gets worse. The projections for fiscal year 2025 show the Cures Act funding decreasing again, this time by another $199 million.
Wow.
If the federal government sustains the program at that drastically reduced level, it represents a staggering 71% reduction compared to the funding they had just 2 years prior in 2023.
A 71% cut to the program supposed to invent the future of medicine.
It's devastating.
The source documents even mention that the program had to put explicit warnings right on their public website, telling participants that a lapse in government funding was literally halting website updates and transactions.
This is a profound irony. The scientific community spent decades building the ethical frameworks, the consent protocols, and the secure technological infrastructure to ensure we never repeat the Lacks family tragedy.
Right.
We finally have a system designed to do it right, yet the entire apparatus is crippled because it relies on annual federal appropriations.
Right, because data security isn't a one-time purchase. You don't just buy a firewall and walk away. You have to constantly update it to fight off hackers.
Exactly.
If your budget is slashed by 70%, what happens to the data?
Well, the real-world impacts of these cuts are immediate. It severely limits their ability to enroll new diverse populations. It slows down the collection of biospecimens.
It stalls the whole mission.
It does. And specifically, the sources note that it delays the launch of their pediatric cohort, meaning research into childhood precision medicine is effectively stalled. You cannot build long-term scientific discovery on a foundation of incredibly unstable financial infrastructure.
So we have these massive federal databases struggling for cash.
Right.
But let's bring this down to the individual level. Let's move from the giant government servers right into your local doctor's office.
Okay.
Because even if programs like All of Us are generating all this data, or if a commercial lab like 23andMe sends you a massive report on your DNA, who actually sits across from you in the exam room to explain what any of it means?
And that is where the entire system hits a massive bottleneck. According to a scoping review we analyzed from the Journal of Genetic Counseling, we are facing a severe critical workforce shortage on the front lines of genomic medicine.
Right.
There's a massive lack of certified genetic counselors. These are people who undergo years of specialized training specifically to interpret DNA results and guide patients through them.
Which means the people who are actually ordering the vast majority of these complex genetic tests are not geneticists.
No, they aren't.
The literature refers to them as non-genetics healthcare professional, or NGHPs. That is your primary care doctor. It's your local oncologist. It's the nurse practitioner at the walk-in clinic.
And this raises one of the most contentious debates in modern medicine today. Should NGHPs, providers without specialized genetics degrees, be the ones providing these genetic services to patients?
Okay, wait, let me stop you there and play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
I trust my primary care doctor. They went to medical school. They order my comprehensive metabolic panels. They read my cholesterol results. They interpret my white blood cell counts.
Yeah.
Why is reading a genetic test so fundamentally different that it requires an entirely separate, specialized counselor? Why can't my regular doctor just read the lab report?
It's a fair question, but the nature of the data is completely different. When your doctor gets a cholesterol result, it is generally binary. The number is 220, it's high, or it's low.
Right.
Take a statin.
Right, so pretty straightforward.
Genetic data is almost never binary. It is steeped in deep statistical probability, generational family dynamics, and science that is evolving by the month. The survey data is clear. Most genetic counselors actually fundamentally disagree with NGHPs providing these services because they are terrified of catastrophic medical errors.
And the examples provided in the source material of these medical errors are chilling. It's not just a scenario where a doctor looks at a test and says, I don't know what this means, let's send you to a specialist.
No.
The real danger is when a doctor thinks they do know what it means and they are completely wrong.
The biggest fear cited by genetic counselors revolves around something called a VUS, a variant of uncertain significance.
Walk me through what the VUS actually is.
Imagine a lab sequences your DNA and they find a spelling error in one of your genes. It's mutated. But when they check the global scientific databases, there isn't enough evidence to know if that specific spelling error actually causes a disease or if it is just a completely harmless, benign quirk of your specific biology. That is a variant of uncertain significance. The lab is essentially saying, we found something, but we have no idea if it's dangerous.
So what happens when a primary care doctor, who isn't trained in the nuances of genetics, sees a lab report that flags a mutation?
GCs report countless examples of NGHPs seeing a VUS on a report and incorrectly interpreting it as a definitive positive diagnosis.
Oh, no.
Imagine a patient comes in, gets a genetic test for breast cancer risk, and it comes back with a VUS. The untrained doctor tells the patient, you have a genetic mutation that causes breast cancer.
Even though it's uncertain.
Exactly. The patient panics, and based on that incorrect interpretation, they undergo an entirely unnecessary prophylactic double mastectomy. They surgically remove healthy tissue because of a statistical misunderstanding.
That is horrifying. And there was another specific example in the interviews regarding the BRCA gene. The BRCA mutations are highly publicized. They are the genes strongly associated with a high risk of breast and ovarian cancer.
Yes. The source detailed a scenario where a provider incorrectly told a patient they carried a BRCA mutation. The provider instituted all the heavy, invasive screening protocols and caused profound psychosocial distress for the patient and their family.
But they didn't have it.
It turned out the patient didn't have a BRCA mutation at all. They carried a mutation on a different gene called BRIP1.
Which I imagine has completely different rules for how you manage the patient.
Entirely different risks, different timelines for screening, and different implications for their children. Furthermore, the studies show that NGHPs consistently fail to perform a proper 3-generation pedigree.
Oops, hi.
A genetic counselor doesn't just look at you, they map out the health history of your parents, your grandparents, your aunts and uncles to establish a pattern of inheritance.
Right.
Primary care doctors simply don't have the time in a standard 15-minute appointment to do that, meaning they miss the broader familial risk entirely.
So the genetic counselors are saying, stop letting regular doctors order these tests. But wait, if there is a massive shortage of genetic counselors, and we ban regular doctors from ordering the test, doesn't that just mean nobody gets genetic testing?
And that is the necessary, painful compromise. It comes down to health equity. Some genetic counselors in the study acknowledge that despite the very real risks of misinterpretation, NDHPs must be allowed to order these tests.
Because we can't gatekeep it.
Exactly, because if we gatekeep genomic medicine behind a wall of specialized counselors, we severely limit access to care.
Right. If you live in a rural area, the nearest genetic counselor might be a 5-hour drive away, or there might be a 6-month wait list to get a telehealth appointment. You can't just tell those patients they don't get to benefit from precision medicine.
Exactly. We cannot abandon populations to avoid statistical errors. So, the consensus among GCs is shifting toward a model of rigorous upskilling. If NGHPs are going to be on the front lines of genetics, there are critical competencies they absolutely must master. Over 85% of GCs surveyed stated that NGHPs must know how to accurately interpret a lab result, specifically knowing what to do with a VUS.
Right.
They must understand how to explain the psychosocial risks of genetic information to a patient.
And the most crucial point the sources highlighted, they need to know their own limits. They need to know when to collaborate.
Yes.
A primary care doctor has to know exactly when a case has exceeded their knowledge base and requires an immediate referral to a genetics expert.
And there is empirical hope on this front. The scoping review looks specifically at educational interventions designed for nursing professionals.
Did it work?
It found that targeted education, whether it is an intensive face-to-face workshop or a structured online module, does significantly improve a nurse's competency and confidence in handling genomic information.
That's great.
The knowledge gap can be bridged with proper training. Though the literature notes we still need long-term studies to see if they actually retain that knowledge years later.
All right, so let's walk through the timeline. Let's say your primary care doctor does have that training. They order the genomic test, the lab sequences your DNA, the doctor interprets it correctly, and they sit down and explain the results to you perfectly. Crisis averted.
In theory, yes.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Once that digital record of your DNA, alongside your entire medical history, exists in the hospital's electronic health record system, where does it actually go? How is it protected? Because the one thing we absolutely do not want is a digital repeat of George Day packaging up your biological data and sending it to anyone who asks for it.
This brings us to the architecture of the digital fortress. The dense legal and technological frameworks explicitly designed to build a wall around your data. But before we dive into the laws themselves, we need to deconstruct the terminology. In casual conversation, people use the words privacy, confidentiality, and security interchangeably. But in the realm of health informatics, they are three very distinct concepts.
And I love a good analogy to keep abstract concepts straight. So think of your medical data like a very exclusive, high-end nightclub.
I like this.
Privacy is the VIP list. It is the fundamental set of rules that dictates who is legally allowed to step foot in the club and look at your information in the first place. You, the patient, have the ultimate right to privacy. You dictate the list.
Right.
Confidentiality is the bouncer standing at the door. It is your healthcare provider's ethical and legal duty to keep your secrets. The bouncer's job is to check the IDs and ensure that only the people you put on that VIP list get inside.
Makes sense.
And security. That is the vault in the back room where the money is kept. Those are the physical locks, the digital firewalls, the biometric scanners, the encryption algorithms. Security represents the actual tools used to enforce privacy and confidentiality.
That is a perfect framework. And the bedrock for how we govern that VIP list didn't start with modern computers. It goes back to the 1970s with something called FPIPs, the Fair Information Practice Principles.
What are those?
These aren't a specific law, but rather an internationally recognized philosophical foundation for almost all modern data privacy legislation. FPPs emphasize core tenets like transparency, meaning an organization has to tell you exactly what data they are collecting.
Okay.
They emphasize data minimization, meaning a hospital should only collect the data absolutely necessary for your care and nothing more. And they emphasize accountability.
And those principles eventually birthed the biggest, most well-known privacy law in the United States,
AIPA.
the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, passed in 1996. Now, anyone who has been to a doctor in the last 20 years has mindlessly signed a IPA form on a clipboard. But IP is a massive piece of legislation, essentially divided into 3 broad rules.
Let's break those down. First is the privacy rule. This is what officially defines protected health information, or PHI.
The VIP list.
Exactly. It establishes the national standards for exactly who can use or disclose your PHI. Generally, it allows your doctors to share data for basic treatment, payment, or healthcare operations. But if a researcher wants to use your data for a study or a marketing firm wants to see it, the privacy rule dictates that they must get your explicit written authorization.
Second is the security rule. While the privacy rule applies to all formats, even paper charts, the security rule applies specifically to electronic PHI.
The vault.
Right. This is the mandate that forces covered entities, like hospitals and insurance companies, to build the vault. They must conduct rigorous, regular risk assessments. They have to implement specific access controls, like making sure a nurse in the maternity ward can't randomly open the psychiatric files of a patient they aren't treating. They have to use technical safeguards to stop hackers.
And the third piece, which is critical when things go wrong, is the breach notification rule.
What happens when the vault gets broken into?
Right. If the vault is broken into, the bouncer fails, and your VIP list is compromised, the hospital cannot sweep it under the rug. They are legally obligated to notify the Department of Health and Human Services.
Oh, wow.
They must notify you, the affected individual. And if the breach is large enough, affecting more than 500 people, they are legally required to notify the prominent local media outlets in your area.
And the enforcement arm for all of this is the Office of Civil Rights, or the OCR. I was looking through the penalty structures, and the OCR does not mess around. But I'm curious, how exactly do they calculate the fines? Is it just a flat rate if you get hacked?
Not at all. The financial penalties are tiered based on the level of institutional negligence.
Okay.
If a hospital is doing everything right, but a highly sophisticated state-sponsored hacker still manages to breach the system, and the hospital couldn't have reasonably prevented it, the fine might be a minimum of $100 per violation.
That's essentially a slap on the wrist for a hospital.
But if the OCR investigates and finds what they call willful neglect, meaning the hospital knew their software was outdated, knew they didn't have firewalls, and simply chose not to spend the money to fix it,
Oh.
the penalty skyrockets. It shoots up to a minimum of $50,000 per single violation, and it caps out at $1.5 million annually for identical violations.
So HIPAA is a massive stick to keep hospitals in line. But HIPAA primarily protects your data from being shared inappropriately by your doctors. What about your genetic data specifically?
Good question.
What stops a massive corporation from getting their hands on that BRIP1 mutation we talked about earlier? What stops your employer from finding out you have a high risk of early onset Alzheimer's and deciding to fire you before your medical bills go up?
That specific fear is what led to GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, passed in 2008. GINA was designed to encourage people to participate in genomic research and precision medicine without the fear of it ruining their lives.
So under GINA, my genetic data is totally safe from insurers and employers, right?
Well, it is safe from your health insurance.
Okay.
GINA makes it federally illegal for a health insurance provider to use your genetic test results to deny you coverage or raise your monthly premiums. And it makes it strictly illegal for employers to use your genetic data in hiring, firing, or promotion decisions.
Look.
However, GINA contains massive loopholes that the average patient is entirely unaware of until it is too late.
Wait, what loopholes? Who can still use my DNA against me?
GINA applies exclusively to health insurance and employment. It does absolutely nothing to protect you if you are applying for life insurance.
Wait, really?
It does not protect you if you apply for long-term disability insurance or long-term care insurance. Those specific companies are legally allowed to ask for your genetic information, and they can, and frequently do, use that data to deny you a policy or charge you astronomical rates.
That is a terrifying loophole. If you get a test to help your doctor treat you, you might accidentally make yourself uninsurable for life insurance.
It happens.
And it's not just our genetics that are vulnerable. The sources note we are increasingly generating massive amounts of biometric data. Our fingerprints on our phones, our facial geometry on security cameras, retinal scans.
And because federal law is often agonizingly slow to adapt to new technology, some individual states are stepping up to fill the void. States like Illinois, Texas, and Washington have passed BIPAs, Biometric Information Privacy Acts.
The Illinois law is particularly fascinating in the legal landscape. It features something called a private right of action.
Explain why that is so powerful.
Usually, if a company violates a privacy law, you have to wait for a government agency, like the Attorney General, to sue them and levy a fine. But a private right of action means that everyday citizens can directly sue a corporation themselves if their biometric data is captured without their explicit written consent.
It gives the power to the people.
It immediately unleashes a wave of class action lawsuits against tech giants.
So we have this chaotic patchwork of legal walls. We have HIPAA, we have GINA with its loopholes, we have state-level BIPAs. They are all demanding that hospitals and tech companies build thicker, taller walls around your data.
Right.
But why are they so desperate to build them? Because the digital cyber battleground for healthcare data is vicious. Healthcare systems are the absolute prime targets for global cyber criminals.
And it begs the question, why hospitals? Why not hack a massive bank? A bank literally has all the money. Why go after a regional healthcare system?
Because hacking a bank is about stealing money. Hacking a hospital is about extortion through leverage.
Leverage.
And the ultimate leverage is life and death. If a major bank's computer system goes offline for 2 days, it's highly inconvenient. You can't check your checking account balance.
Yeah.
But if a hospital's computer system goes offline for 2 days, the doctors in the ICU cannot see what dose of medication a patient received.
That's terrifying.
The ventilators might lose network connectivity. Surgeries are canceled. People could literally die.
Yeah.
Hackers know this. They know that hospital administrators are incredibly desperate to get their systems back online to save lives, which makes them the perfect targets to pay a ransom quickly.
The sources outline the specific threats these hospitals face every single day. There is phishing, where hackers send highly sophisticated fraudulent emails to a tired nurse or doctor, tricking them into typing in their login credentials.
Right.
There is keylogging, where malware gets onto a computer and silently records every single keystroke, capturing passwords as they are typed. There are botnets, where networks of infected computers launch denial-of-service attacks, overwhelming the hospital's network with millions of fake requests until the servers physically crash.
But the most devastating, paralyzing threat facing healthcare today is ransomware.
I really want to visualize this for the listener, because it's not a hacker stealing a file and running away. Imagine you are running a massive, vital public library. A ransomware attack isn't a thief sneaking in and stealing all the books. Instead, it's a thief sneaking in at night, putting an indestructible heavy steel padlock on every single book, and then completely scrambling the numbers on the Dewey Decimal System.
Oh, wow.
The books are all still physically sitting there on the shelves, but the library is functionally dead. No one can read anything until you pay the thief for the master key to open the padlocks.
That is exactly how it works. It is malicious software that infects the hospital system and aggressively encrypts all the electronic health records. The doctors try to open a patient's chart, and it is just gibberish. The only thing on the screen is a message demanding a massive cryptocurrency payout in exchange for the decryption key.
And when a hospital is breached, when those padlocks go on, the legal landscape for holding that hospital accountable is shifting dramatically. In the past, if a hospital was hacked and your medical data was stolen, it was actually very hard for you, the patient, to sue them successfully.
Yeah.
You generally had to prove actual harm, meaning you had to prove to a judge that the stolen data directly resulted in someone stealing your identity and draining your bank account.
Right.
If your data was just sitting on the dark web, judges often said, you haven't been harmed yet.
But our sources highlight a fascinating, almost bizarre legal precedent that is emerging to change that, and it is coming from a completely unlikely source.
This blew my mind. The legal blueprint that patients are starting to use to sue massive hospital systems over data breaches was actually established by the Ashley Madison hack.
The dating site.
Yeah, for those who don't remember, Ashley Madison was a dating website that explicitly, openly facilitated marital infidelity. In 2015, a group of hackers breached their servers. The hackers demanded the site be shut down permanently. When the corporate owners refused, the hackers dumped the highly sensitive private information of roughly 32 million users onto the public internet.
The fallout was chaotic. But legally, what happened next was groundbreaking. The users who were exposed sued the parent company. But they didn't just sue for a basic privacy violation. They utilized a legal concept known as a negligent security theory.
Break down how that works in practice.
The plaintiffs argued that because Ashley Madison was collecting data that was so inherently radioactive, so incredibly sensitive to the users' lives, the company had a heightened legal duty to provide adequate cybersecurity.
Okay.
They argued that the company's failure to maintain strong firewalls wasn't just an accident, it was an act of profound negligence. And that legal argument worked. The case ultimately resulted in an $11.2 million settlement.
And now legal experts in health informatics are noting that this exact theory of negligent data security is becoming the blueprint for patients.
Exactly.
If a hospital gets hit by ransomware and your genetic data is leaked, you don't necessarily have to prove someone stole your identity. You can argue that the hospital was negligent in securing your radioactive health data.
So, put yourself in the shoes of a hospital administrator. You are terrified of massive OCR fines from the government. You are terrified of class action lawsuits based on negligent security if you get hacked. You are terrified of ransomware gangs shutting down your ICU.
Right.
What is your natural reaction?
You lock the vault as tight as humanly possible. You build massive digital walls. You restrict access to everyone. You unplug the servers from outside networks.
Exactly. But here is the massive pendulum swing of the entire healthcare system. Over the last decade, hospitals locked the data down so tightly out of fear that they accidentally broke the medical system in the other direction.
They caused what we now call an interoperability crisis.
Right.
The walls became so thick that the data couldn't actually move when a patient desperately needed it to.
Right.
Let's say you live in New York, but you are on vacation in California, and you end up in the emergency room.
Okay.
The California doctor tries to pull your medical records from your New York primary care doctor. But the hospital systems literally cannot talk to each other. The New York firewall won't let the data out.
Or, even more nefariously, the corporate software vendors who built the electronic health records intentionally made it incredibly difficult to share data with competitor systems.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they wanted to trap hospitals in their ecosystem to protect their market share. If you bought software A, you couldn't send data to a hospital using software B. This anti-competitive practice became known as information blocking.
And eventually, the federal government had to step in and say, enough. We didn't build these systems just to hoard data. Through legislation like MAC-ERA and the massive 21st Century Cures Act, the government essentially dropped a hammer on the industry called the Information Blocking Rule. It is now fundamentally federally illegal for a healthcare provider, a health IT developer, or a health information exchange to intentionally interfere with the access, exchange, or use of electronic health information.
The government realized a core truth. Medical data is only valuable if it can be securely shared at the exact moment it is needed. So they didn't just say, stop blocking. They mandated the technological solution. They forced the entire industry to adopt standardized application programming interfaces, or APIs.
Okay, we're getting into acronym soup here. The sources mention standards like HL7 FHIR and USCDI. Let's translate that into how it actually works.
Think of HL7 FHIR not just as a rule, but as a universal translator.
A translator.
Before this mandate, Hospital A's computer system spoke French, and Hospital B's system spoke Japanese. When they tried to send a file, neither could read it. FHIR forces every single medical software vendor in the country to translate your health data into a single standardized digital language before it sends it over the internet.
So what this means for you, the patient listening right now, is revolutionary. 10 years ago, if you wanted your medical records, you had to drive down to the hospital basement, pay a $20 administrative fee, and wait 30 days for them to hand you a giant stack of printed papers, or maybe a burned CD-ROM with a PDF on it.
It was archaic.
It was. Because of these new API mandates, you can now download a third-party health app on your smartphone, authorize it to securely connect directly to your hospital servers, and pull down your complete standardized medical history instantly.
It fundamentally shifts the ownership of the data back to the patient. And the rules extend beyond just the patient's phone. It also mandates payer-to-payer data exchange.
Between insurance companies.
Yes. If you change jobs and switch health insurance companies, your old insurer is now legally required to seamlessly send all your historical clinical data to your new insurer via these APIs. This ensures your care management, like approvals for chronic medications, doesn't have to start from scratch just because your HR department changed plans.
And there's also a fascinating requirement regarding AEDTs, admission, discharge, and transfer notifications. If you go to the emergency room in the middle of the night, the hospital's electronic system must automatically send a digital ping, a notification, to your regular primary care doctor.
That's incredibly helpful.
Yeah, so when you wake up the next morning, your doctor already knows you were hospitalized and can follow up. It forces the system to be proactive.
It is all about tearing down those silo walls and letting the data flow effortlessly to whoever needs it.
But I know how federal regulations work. There are always loopholes. There are always exceptions. I have to push back on this absolute mandate. Are there ever scenarios where a hospital can look at the government and legally say, no, we are not sending the data?
Yes. The information blocking rule isn't a suicide pact. The government outlined 8 very specific legal exceptions where blocking the data is completely permissible. And looking at these exceptions really highlights the impossible tightrope hospital administrators have to walk every day.
Walk me through these exceptions, because I assume they aren't just, we don't feel like it.
Far from it. Let's look at the first one, preventing harm. Let's say a patient has an API connected to their phone, and a lab result comes back showing a terminal cancer diagnosis. If the doctor believes that automatically releasing that raw result to the patient's phone before they can sit down and explain it poses a genuine physical or severe psychological risk to the patient's safety, the provider can legally delay the data release.
That makes total sense. You don't want a patient finding out they have 6 months to live via an iPhone push notification while they're driving on the highway. What else?
Second is the privacy exception. The API mandate does not override HeLa if releasing the data violates state or federal privacy laws. For example, if a teenager gets reproductive care and state law protects that from their parents, or if a patient simply hasn't signed the required consent form, the hospital must block the transfer.
Right, privacy first.
Third is the security exception. This goes back to our ransomware discussion. If a hospital detects that they are in the middle of an active cyber attack, they are legally allowed to instantly sever all API connections to the outside world to stop the virus from spreading across networks.
Okay, so harm, privacy, and security. Those are the life or death ones. What about the purely operational realities? Computers break.
That is covered by the fourth exception, infeasibility. If a hurricane floods the hospital's server room or there is a massive regional internet outage, the hospital isn't going to be federally penalized for failing to transmit data. They literally can't.
Obviously.
Fifth is health IT performance. Just like any software on your laptop, electronic health records need updates. A hospital can temporarily take their APIs offline for scheduled maintenance to ensure the system remains stable.
What if a patient just asks for something completely unreasonable, like send me every single raw data point from the MRI machine's internal hard drive?
That hits the sixth exception, content and manner. Currently, hospitals are only legally required to provide the specific, standardized data outlined in the US CDI standard. Things like lab results, clinical notes, and medication lists.
Okay.
If a patient demands a massive, unformatted raw data dump that falls outside those bounds or asks for it on a physical thumb drive that poses a security risk, the hospital can block that specific request and offer an alternative, safer format.
And I imagine the software vendors who build these APIs aren't doing it for free.
Which brings us to the final 2 exceptions, fees and licensing. Building and maintaining this highly secure, interoperable network is incredibly expensive. Vendors and health information exchanges are legally allowed to charge reasonable, cost-based fees to maintain the infrastructure.
Right.
And they are allowed to protect their intellectual property through reasonable licensing terms. What they cannot do is use exorbitant price gouging fees as a weapon to intentionally prevent competitors from accessing the network.
Okay. I want to zoom out for a second and look at the sheer overwhelming scale of what we have just mapped out. A modern hospital president has to manage all of this simultaneously. They have to balance the terrifying mandate to securely lock data away in the vault to avoid multi-million-dollar HIPAA fines and ransomware extortion, with the aggressive federal mandate to effortlessly share that exact same data via smartphone APIs.
And at the exact same time, they have to ensure their frontline primary care doctors are rigorously trained to accurately interpret complex genetic VUS results to avoid catastrophic medical errors, all while building massive, diverse data pipelines to feed precision medicine programs like all of us.
Exactly. It is a logistical nightmare. If you are running a hospital, how does the institution not just completely buckle and collapse under the weight of these deeply conflicting demands?
That is the million-dollar question for modern healthcare. And the answer, according to our sources, lies in our final topic, health IT governance.
Governance.
Now, governance sounds like a dry, bureaucratic term, but it is the heartbeat of a hospital. It is not about deciding whether the nurses use Dell laptops or Apple iPads. Health IT governance is the rigid structural process by which a hospital's leadership decides how to prioritize its incredibly limited IT resources, time, and budget.
Because everyone in the hospital wants a piece of the IT team's time.
Everyone. The researchers at the Academic Medical Center are banging on the door, demanding massive data pulls to feed their precision medicine algorithms. The finance executives are demanding a new AI tool to optimize billing codes and increase revenue.
Right.
The frontline emergency room doctors are exhausted and demanding the IT team completely redesign the software to reduce the number of clicks it takes to prescribe antibiotics. And the compliance officers are running down the hallway screaming that they have to implement the new government API mandates by next Tuesday or face federal fines.
Without a strong governance structure, how do decisions get made? Does the IT department just do whatever the CEO says?
Without governance, the decision-making process devolves into chaos. It defaults to the loudest voice in the room. Whoever complains the most gets their project funded.
That sounds terrible.
Or worse, the strategy is dictated entirely by the external software vendors who convince the hospital to buy flashy tools they don't actually need. To prevent this, mature institutions implement formal governance structures. This typically involves the board of directors setting the overarching 10-year strategic vision for the hospital and then empowering an IT steering committee, a group made up of clinical, financial, and technical executives to ruthlessly adjudicate these competing demands.
Oh, wait, I have to push back on this structure. A steering committee sounds like corporate jargon. We form a committee that takes 6 months to make a decision. How does a slow committee fix a fast-moving crisis?
That's a fair point.
How do they balance the boring, everyday stuff like keeping the servers from crashing with the cool, innovative stuff like building AI tools? How do you keep the lights on while inventing the future?
That tension is exactly why industry analysts at Gartner proposed a framework called bimodal IT. It recognizes that an IT department cannot operate at just one speed. It has to operate in 2 distinct modes simultaneously.
Okay, what's mode 1?
Mode 1 is predictable operations. This is the bedrock. This is the team dedicated to keeping the electronic health record running 24 hours a day without a glitch. They are the ones ensuring the firewalls are patched against ransomware and handling the daily operational needs of the hospital.
Keep the lights on.
Mode 1 is inherently reliable, highly secure, and intentionally slow to change. You do not want them taking risks.
Because if Node 1 fails, the ER doctor can't pull up a patient's allergy chart and someone dies.
Exactly. But if you only have Mode 1, your hospital becomes a dinosaur. That is where Mode 2 comes in. Mode 2 is exploratory innovation. This is the agile, fast-paced development team.
The innovators.
They are the ones building the new digital health apps for patients, experimenting with predictive analytics, or figuring out how to integrate wearable devices like Apple Watches into the clinical workflow.
So the governance committee acts as the referee between the two.
A mature health IT governance structure recognizes that you need both modes, but they have to be managed completely differently. You cannot apply the sluggish, risk-averse rules of Mode 1 to the rapid prototyping of Mode 2 because you will stifle all innovation.
Right.
And critically, you absolutely cannot introduce the wild instability and bugs of Mode 2 into your core clinical systems. The governance committee ensures Mode 1 keeps the hospital safe and functioning, while Mode 2 pushes the boundaries of what is possible, all while ensuring everything adheres to HIPAA, GINA, and the Cures Act.
It ensures that the technology ultimately serves the strategic goals of the hospital and the patient, rather than the hospital becoming a slave to the technology.
Precisely.
What a profound journey. Let's do a quick recap of the epic lifespan of your medical data that we've charted today. It all starts with a physical, tangible reality. A biopsy, a tube of blood, much like Henrietta Lacks in 1951. From there, through the lens of informed consent, it is sequenced into complex genomic data where it enters the modern healthcare ecosystem.
Once inside, it has to be interpreted by frontline providers who are hopefully receiving the rigorous training required to know exactly when to call a genetic counselor so they don't misread a variant of uncertain significance and cause a tragic medical error.
That data is then placed deep inside the hospital's digital fortress. It is heavily guarded by the bouncers of HIPAA confidentiality and the vault locks of cybersecurity, constantly fending off the very real paralyzing threats of phishing attacks and ransomware extortion.
And finally, thanks to the information blocking rule and interoperability APIs, that data breaks free from the hospital's isolated silo. It is securely routed over the internet, translated by FHIR right back into the palm of your hand onto the screen of your smartphone.
It is a stunning, invisible ecosystem that dictates your health just as much as your physical body does. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, deeply provocative puzzle to chew on.
A philosophical wrinkle to end our deep dive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When we looked at international privacy laws in the source material, there's a fascinating concept embedded in the European Union's GDPR called the right to be forgotten.
Oh, this is interesting.
It essentially gives a citizen the ultimate power to demand that an organization completely delete their personal data once it is no longer needed for its original purpose. It sounds like the perfect solution.
Yeah.
Complete autonomous control over your shadow self. You can just erase it.
But consider the reality of the highly interoperable, machine learning-driven ecosystem we just described for the last hour.
Right. Think about the physical mechanics of where your data goes.
Right.
What if your genetic data has been de-identified and legally uploaded to a massive centralized patient safety organization repository?
Right.
What if it has been seamlessly shared across a dozen peer-to-peer APIs over the last 5 years as you switch jobs?
What if your specific biomarkers, your unique genetic quirks, have already been ingested and digested by a massive neural network? What if your data was utilized to train the complex algorithms that power modern precision medicine?
If your ones and zeros, your biological secrets, are inextricably baked into the very mathematical weights of an AI diagnostic tool, can your data ever truly be deleted?
Tough question.
Can you ever pull it back? In a highly connected, fiercely interoperable world, does the right to be forgotten functionally cease to exist? Who really holds the keys to your biological data once it enters the ether?
It is a profound question that the legal, ethical, and technological frameworks of tomorrow will be forced to answer.
Something to mull over the next time you log into a patient portal, sign a consent form, or hand over a tube of saliva. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden universe of your medical data. Keep asking questions, keep protecting your shadow self, and we will see you next time.